Chris Frederick from Stretch to Win Institute at stretchtowin.com. I'm very excited to be here with friend, colleague, David Lasondak. And specifically, it's about his new book, his first book. It's called Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters. There it is.
And there it is. That's right.
And that's why we're here today to talk about his book. So buckle down, get a hot drink, cold drink, make yourself comfortable. I think we're going to have some fun here. There we go. So let's just start with where did we first meet? Anne debated this with me, and I'm thinking, so what do you remember?
I remember a bleary train ride from the airport at the Stuttgart airport train to Ulm in, I want to say, 2010. I mean, my feeling is like we connected getting coffee in the airport and then taking the train together, and both being bleary from an intercontinental flight and slap happy and really enjoying each other's company. So,
Yeah.
Anne very well may be right, but I don't recall us really like hanging out until Germany.
And we went to the Ulm Summer School, the Ulm University of Ulm, or Ulm University, where Robert Schleip and his team have pioneered some of the first fascial research in fascia. That's kind of the center of fascial research. I mean, not the only place, of course, but you know more about that than I do. But when was that? 2000? That was 2010. Yes,
2010.
That's almost 8 years ago. So it's incredible where we've all come since, and especially you with the book. So I want to praise it because it really was easy reading. I'm going to really quickly read for the listeners. I love the way David tells his story. And by the way, this is what I wrote after looking at the book and reading it and looking through it. I wrote this. David was very nice to include this in the inside cover. Again, I love the way David tells his story by first relating the facts and theories we all need for such a complex subject as fascia, yet he covers extensive but essential material in a way that leaves you refreshingly in a state of wonderment instead of exhaustion. And then I go on and on. I'm not going to belabor this, but basically I felt it was conversational. It was an easy, not totally easy read. It wasn't a difficult read. I mean, you had to pay attention. Let's just put it that way, you know.
Okay.
You had to use your interceptive focus. That's what you talk about when reading this book.
All right. Okay.
And so I think everyone who considers fascia on any level when they assess, treat, or otherwise work with people, patients, whoever, I think needs to read this book. I really do. It's up to date as much as you can get up to date in a book at this point. And I think there's some new perspectives that I'd like to talk about. So I think it's great for everybody, and in particular, my fascial stretch therapy students and graduates. So what motivated you to write this book?
It had been on my mind for a number of years. I just happened to be fortunate enough and took advantage of the opportunities presented to me really since about 2004 on, having had the opportunity to work with Tom Myers to video document the anatomy trains via fascial dissections, to go to the fascia summer school in Ulm, get invited back, and continue to document on video all of the scientific presentations, plus having access then to under tight digital lock and key the presentations from the presenters to edit into the videos from those things. So I just started absorbing so much information.
And I think I'm proud to say that you and I were in that first class. That was the first class of the week-long summer school of research in fascia. We started.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And I remember very clearly you two got up and presented a little 20-minute piece on fascial stretch therapy, and I was Anne's demo dolly.
And that's right.
And I had this moment of, oh my God, this is amazing. Oh my God, I need to learn this. Wow, you know, and we've all had interesting bodywork experiences, but yours was the first one in a while that made me go, wow, this is a thing I need to understand more of.
Yeah.
But, so kudos.
Yeah.
And to me, there didn't exist a book. Like you said, it's easy to read. You have to use your brain, but it's easy to read. And as one reviewer of the book said on Amazon, it doesn't hit you over the head with 6 and 7 syllable words. to the point where you don't know what you just read. It also doesn't try to make it so accessible that it's completely inaccurate. And that seemed to me to be the case. There's some very wonderful books that are like this, and they're very dense and they're very slow reads, and that's fine. Those books need to be there. And then there's some that are very driven by specific techniques, and those are fine too. But there seemed to me to be a gap that could bring both of those things together.
Right.
So I figured if after spending years immersed in the science of it, and frankly, that made it easier to explain to the patients that I treat what we're doing and why it's working, or what I think about why it's working. If I can understand it, then everybody should be able to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And Handspring Publishing just happened to be looking for just that sort of book. And I was talking with Andrew, and he just looked at me and said, "Well, would you like to take a crack at it? Because we'd love a book like that." And it's like, are you going to say no to that? So, in some ways, I had been thinking about it and prepping for it for, 8 or 9 years before I actually started writing the thing. I just didn't realize it at the time.
Well, that's a great sort of inspiration and story of what motivated you to write the book. And I think what I'd like to do is just pick out some parts of the book,
Mm-hmm.
maybe in each chapter a little bit, and get
Sure.
some of your thoughts on that.
See that.
Chapter 1, definition of fascia. You really went into some length there. I was at the Fascial Research Congress. I've been to every single one since '07. So have you. And the description of fascia is still in contention to some degree, and there and dissension in terms of what people want it to be.
Yeah.
So, any progress since your book in terms of where we're at? Just a quick summary nutshell. We have the Anatomica organization that wants it defined very, in a box, pretty
Right.
much like parts of the body, versus what we would like it to be, maybe on a more global, all-encompassing description. Any word on that?
Right. Actually, there is, and it was very frustrating because by the time I discovered it, it was too late, and we were making changes up until a week before it had to go to print as new information or certain things were coming in.
Sure.
But this would have required a little more of a rewrite to the first chapter, to the point that it would have ruined the layout and design, and I know you understand how that works. But there has been progress, and it really isn't totally different from what I outline or inferred in the first chapter. But it's the difference between fascia, so for those very precise Anatomica type people that we know when we're saying fascia, it's exactly what we mean, as opposed to the fascial system. So I suppose I could have entitled the book "The Fascial System: What It Is and Why It Matters," but people see fascial and they see facial, so I just wanted to avoid that. But the nomenclature committee for the Fascia Research Congress has come up with a proposed definition, so it's not totally been accepted yet, of the fascial system. And I have that pulled up right here on my screen.
Okay.
And it says, the fascial system consists of the three-dimensional continuum of soft, collagen-containing, loose and dense, fibrous connective tissues that permeate the body. It incorporates such elements as adipose tissue, adventitia and neurovascular sheaths, aponeuroses, deep and superficial fascia, epineurium, joint capsules, ligaments, membranes, meninges, myofascial expansions, periostea, retinacula, septa, tendons, visceral fascia, and all of the intramuscular and intermuscular connective tissues, including the endo-peri-epimysium. Whew, at least it's in alphabetical order. The fascial system interpenetrates and surrounds. I need to read this like Obi-Wan Kenobi. The fascial system interpenetrates and surrounds all of the organs, muscles, bones, and nerve fibers, endowing the body with a functional structure and providing an environment that enables all body systems to operate in an integrated manner. Binds the galaxy of the body together.
Super.
So that last part was me. That's not part of the proposed definition. So things are moving forward, And I think that's actually going to be a really, really good thing because we can, okay, from a histological tissue standpoint, say fascia is this, but in terms of a systems orientation, we can say the fascial system does that. So
Right.
that becomes more the physiological
Right.
definition.
Right.
So I think that's good, and if we can get that into it, I think everybody should be able to play happy then. If we have, again, one of the concepts from the book is this idea that fascia is the both and
Mm.
uh, uh, of the body. It's an organ and it's a system.
Well,
You know.
as you started the definition, you're starting the book basically through the definition, which is appropriate, so we can all know what we're talking about and what we're defining. We've done
Hmm.
that, so that's perfect. Thanks for the update. Moving forward with the fascial, let's say anatomy, maybe even getting into the systems aspects a little bit. Talking about the layers. Gil Headley was at our place about 3 weeks ago, 3 to 4 weeks
Hmm.
ago. So the updated information about his fuzz speech, and folks who are listening, just look up the fuzz speech from, I don't know, over 10 years ago now. Dr. Headley has since revised his fuzz into saying there's normal fuzz. The things
Hmm.
that he used to call pathological and adhesions are not. Yes, there are people who have adhesions. There is pathological fuzz, is his claim, but he's also recognizing now more of what he would call normal. And a lot of that came out of his transitioning from the formaldehyde based cadaver studies
Hmm.
to more unembalmed, and having done many, 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 many more, and finally seeing patterns
Hmm.
in the unembalmed that he did not really see or appreciate as much with the embalmed. And so I just want to get your take a little bit on that.
So did Gil have some pictures of the unembalmed that showed these patterns
Yes,
or video? Like, oh man,
not
because
too many, not too many.
mhm. I unfortunately I missed Gil when he came through Pittsburgh right around Labor Day.
Hmm.
Um, so we had other plans for the Labor Day weekend, and it was just an unfortunate accident of scheduling. But that's a conversation I'd really love to have with him because I used to work in a funeral home, so I'm very familiar with embalming techniques.
Oh, right. Got all.
um, and in the fuzz speech, the original fuzz speech, so I look at the fuzz speech and I look at those pictures and I think about what those chemicals do to dry things out in the body,
Yeah.
and I look at the vibrant aliveness of Jean-Claude Gamberto's
Mm,
endoscopic videos, and to me, I'm wondering, are these essentially the same thing?
right.
You're looking at it when it's dried out and as much as possible deliquified for preservation. So you're seeing the fuzz, but in the living system, it's this hydraulic hydrodynamic uh, colloid system.
Yes, and
So it's the fuzz and artifact of the multi micro vacuoles
yeah.
that Gilberto talks about.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of cool to see the evolution of his observations, that we do have, well, when he taking it further into the unembalmed, he talks about now studying and noticing more and observing more patterns in so-called normal bodies that don't have, let's say in those areas that he looked at, they have these normal mobility of what he calls now membranes, and
Mhm.
there's 2 to 3 layers of membrane, 2 to 3 separate layers of membranes between the superficial and deep fascia that move in different directions. And I remember seeing that at the Ulm. Do you
Hmm.
remember the rat we dissected there?
Yes, 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 yes.
I
Hmm.
was so, I don't know if you remember, they took a picture of my superficial fascia dissection. They were like, oh my God, how did you do that without tearing it? It's so fragile.
Uh huh.
And I got to appreciate, because before I even cut it out, I was palpating the skin, and then we removed it, and I tried to palpate, whatever I could. And so I saw some of the videos that Gil showed. So anyway, I think, not to belabor this, but the membranous layers, I think it's a new appreciation,
Hmm.
at least in his descriptions, and we all thought about it differently, perhaps when we're palpating.
Yes.
Okay, we have the skin, the superficial layer that's attached to the skin, and then we have these membranes, he called it membranes. You can call it what you will. Andrew Taylor still actually called them membranes.
Yes,
In
he
your
did.
book, you quoted that. and then you have the
Hmm.
deep fascial layer. So it's just something to put out there. Keep
Yeah,
your
I would love to see the because I've worked with fresh cadavers also, and they definitely behave. Fresh dead people behave differently than preserved dead people. And the rats that we were working on, for you listening at home, they were fresh, meaning that they had been euthanized within. They were still warm,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And in terms of seeing the tissue behave the way that we imagine it's behaving underneath our fingers when we're working it, it's as close to that as you could possibly get.
Yes.
So I'd love to. I don't remember your photos. We weren't in the same lab.
Okay.
I just remember. I just remember personally having difficulty getting through the skin layer because it was so thick.
Well, speaking of
Mhm.
that, moving on through this, the skin. This is again from Headley. He said it's fibrous and fixed to the superficial fascia. Therefore, they move together. So when you roll skin, for example, like some of us
Mhm.
have this rolling technique, you roll
Right.
the
Right.
skin. You can't separate that from the superficial fascia. So you're rolling skin and superficial fascia relative to the deep fascia, is what Headley stated. And I've heard practitioners say in the past, I'm rolling or lifting the skin over the superficial fascia as if they're two distinct layers. Do
Yeah.
you have any thoughts about that?
Uh, just on the surface of it, Gil's idea makes sense to me. Um, Skin, other than the sensory experience of skin rolling, from a therapeutic standpoint, I never got a value from it
Right,
personally.
right.
That doesn't mean I'm saying it's bad or we shouldn't do it. It's just my personal experience of it. So the idea that there's an interconnectedness there that can't be separated makes sense with me experientially.
Right.
Now, how we would actually go about proving something like that, it's hard to say.
Well, it gets into mobility of the fascia and the skin, and yeah, we all know skin can move over something
Right.
below.
Right. And certainly if you look at scar tissues,
Yeah,
you can't roll over scar tissues. That's where all those layers are just impacted like that. So
stapled.
that gives more credence to what I think Gil's saying.
Yeah, so he went further, and I thought this is it on him. The normal relationship between the superficial and deep is more variable than maybe some of us have thought. Whereas you have more tissue play or slide in some areas of the body. I'll give an example that he did not give. Let's say the abdominal area. You have
Hmm.
more, given that it's a normal with no scar tissue, it has a normal amount of tissue play. Let's call that more tissue play than over the back, or even over the, let's say, right over the greater trochanter. Let's say with some lean people,
Hmm.
um,
Okay.
it has less tissue play, yet those are both normal. I think it's just to develop an appreciation for, can we actually assess, or keep in mind that just because something doesn't move in a certain area of the body, that may not be an adhesion. I'm just putting it out there. It may not
Yep.
be an adhesion. It rather may be a less normal, less mobile area, simply because that's where it's supposed to be more stable, from a
Hmm.
biotensegrity point of view. And in other places, it doesn't have to be as stable, because I think a lot of therapies try to, we're going to remove that adhesion, we're going to break up that adhesion, we're going to
Right.
mobilize. And it's not like we're full of adhesion necessarily everywhere. You know what I
Hey,
mean?
you're full of adhesions.
Yeah, I'm not asking for an answer, or even
Hmm.
you can put your thoughts on
Oh
it.
no, I think that's important. And this goes back to something Tom Myers said to me in a class years and years and years ago. Is are there areas that we shouldn't work or we shouldn't disturb? Are there some let's take it from the functional bit to the postural bit. So I play guitar, and my left shoulder is always somewhat higher than my right shoulder because that is probably always going to be a part of me because of my hobby. So for me, that's normal. It's not really awfully distorted in a way that would be bad. So one of the things I try to do when I'm assessing people, whether it's a postural assessment or a motion based assessment, is by then I have some idea of what their daily activities are, but also the things that they like to do that aren't work related, or the things that they used to do or want to be doing or whatever. So I try to take that into consideration.
Hmm.
If I was looking at a right-handed a professional baseball pitcher who was a right-hander versus a southpaw, and I was looking at their thoracic spine, I would expect it to look differently.
Sure.
because of what they're doing and what the force transmissions are doing to the tissues. So I think we need to take those situational things into account always.
The form follows function
Right.
that you describe later in the book.
Right. So like, oh, you got a little bit of a bend in your spine there, but it's not a complaint. So let's not worry about that. That might be normal for them because of what they do. And it's okay.
Yeah. Well, moving on to chapter 2, fascia integrity and the cell. I thought you did a great job of, kind of discussing basically how we, fascial based therapists, if you
Hmm.
will, and movement instructors, how we as a group have the mindset and philosophy of biotensegrity. And we're still working in a world that deals in body parts,
Uh-huh.
looking at the biomechanical mindset. And we are made of parts that just wear out and need to be replaced.
Hmm.
And you and I have to work with people like that who've had hip replacement, knee replacement, and so on. You talked very well on that, and just a little brief speak on it kind of thing about how do we as biotensegrity practitioners deal with, assess, and treat, I guess, someone with, let's say, hip replacement. They come in with a protocol from the doc and says, you do
Right.
these exercises, then we have to like wrap that into the biotensegrity paradigm. Like, how do you deal with that as a clinician?
Uh, First of all, thank you for that. That was one of my favorite chapters to write.
Hmm.
There was a long plane ride from Los Angeles back to Pittsburgh, and that's where most of that happened after just having presented on biotensegrity at a conference full of physicians. So I was primed for that. Um, it comes down to an individual basis, again, like so many things. Um, the As a practitioner of the biotensegrity model, what I find is that many people who are coming to me post surgery are being overworked. So and some of this is an insurance protocol too, that you have to do PT
Yeah,
3 times a week or you're not trying hard enough.
sure.
And what I have observed almost across the board is that it's too much. And you think about the collagen turnover cycle. That's a 24 to 30, 36 to 48 hour period where the body's eating away more collagen before the net synthesis starts to happen of new collagen after an application of a therapy or a treatment of some kind. And I don't think they're getting enough rest and recovery time. And the idea, that very American idea of you're not working hard enough. So how dare you rest and recover? That's not getting it done.
Hmm.
Um, and what I've often encouraged the people that I treat is to attenuate what they're doing. It's like, oh, well, do you think you think you're doing too much PT? When's your next appointment? Oh, it's Thursday. Today's Tuesday. And when's your one after that? Friday. Okay. Well, what if you didn't go on Thursday? Try it and see what happens. See if you get a better result if you do it that way.
Hmm.
And what I've often found is that 2 PT sessions a week with the adjunctive therapies that I do seem to get a better result
Hmm.
because they're getting the results they want out of the PT, but they're getting the pliability that the PT isn't just getting them. I think you and I had that conversation quite a while ago. Is that you can force a joint to go to a certain range of motion, but that doesn't actually tell you about the pliability or the ease with which it can go there or how often it can go there.
Yeah, you definitely see that with knee replacements where their goal is to get that whatever 110 degrees of knee flexion or whatever it is, 120, as close as they can to as normal knee flexion as possible, and they're forcing it. They're doing all they can to make that happen. But if you don't address all the fascial net line connections, you'll have suboptimal results, and it's a lot more painful for the patient. It's terrible how much pain they have to deal with in therapy. I find that so unnecessary.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that, and I think the other thing that the best thing that we can do is good clinicians is to engender the sense of biotensegrity. We don't have to beat them over the head with them understanding it as a concept, but we can certainly engender the biotensegrity feeling in their bodies when like when you're working on somebody with a hip replacement and you're doing a procedure on the QL and they didn't even know they had a QL and they're like, whoa, that's really something there. And you're like, oh, yes, it is all connected. That's all they need to know is that, yes, it is all connected in that as a therapist how it's all connected. And then they get to experience that. And if you can just prompt them. I call it, when I give people homework, I almost always give them a awareness piece of homework,
Hmm.
which has nothing to do with do this stretch or do this exercise. It's become aware of when you feel X again and what are you doing, and look for a pattern.
Right.
So if they can become aware in the moment of the nature of their own biotensegrity, then they can begin to make subtle corrective changes when they're not in the treatment room. And that's empowering your patient
Makes
to be
total sense.
self-regulating.
That makes total sense. And the biotensegrity concept of pretension that you talk about, I love it. I've used that concept that I call to clients that speak or teach about the biotensegrity concept as optimal tension. That
Mm-hmm.
it is there is a normal amount of tension that we as human beings need to have that three dimensionality and uprightness. And I'll even with athletes, I say yes, it's good to have a normal stiffness in tissue. Otherwise, you'd rupture that Achilles tendon when you take off for that 100 meter dash or sprint with the explosion that you give input into the body when you hit the ground. You have to have a normal amount of strength and stiffness that can tolerate those kinds of forces. Yet it's when I mean, maybe you can speak on a little bit, but how you use that. But if you don't have that, I call it dynamic stability of tension. That's what it
Mm-hmm.
gives you. Then,
Yep.
but then again, if you have too much flexibility in the system, like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Marfan is
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
a good
Yeah.
example. They need that stiffness, that tension. But if you have too much tension, which a lot of athletes get from repetitive practice, they get
Mm-hmm.
too much of that. So now we have to oftentimes stretch it out, structural integration it out, or whatever you take your favorite fascial therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know
Wow.
that concept at all.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's one that I'm. Oh, this is good. Okay, let's get pretentious talking about pretension. This sounds pretentious, but it's something I'm still trying to master. But then I'm thinking, well, it's a master is somebody who started before you did. So, as far as I'm concerned, we should always be moving towards a deeper mastery of whatever it is that we do. And again, I think it's situational. What I've noticed in most rehab type settings and trying to get that balance between flexibility and strength is that almost every single person that I treat somewhere down the line will get back to doing the thing that they love to do, and they're going to feel really, really good, and they're going to overdo it.
Right.
I would say 8 out of 10 of them do that
Hmm.
because you're trying to find out where your new limits are.
Hmm.
And sometimes you don't know where your limits are until you exceed them. Now, hopefully, once they do that, they're going to back off from that, and they usually come and say, "I broke everything you did," and it's like, "No, you didn't. No, you didn't. No, you didn't." But again, then that becomes an opportunity, a teachable moment to fix. I use the F word. Sorry, those of you who don't like that. The problem. Show them, okay, no, they didn't break it. They didn't wind us back to all the way to the beginning when they first started coming in. And then they start listening better.
Hmm.
And they in terms of internal bioregulation, how's that for a new term I made up? That, again, the more you can engender that awareness of, okay, yeah, I do need a certain amount of stiffness in my Achilles to take off with that explosive force, but I also need to, be able to, run and translate that motion through my whole spine as well.
Right.
It's for anybody who's a therapist, it's a constant dance between what they want to do, what your knowledge base is, and how effectively you can communicate that
Oh,
to their inner experience. So the more you learn, I think the more you can communicate to different kinds of people coming in for the same problems who maybe don't think about it the same way. Is that
yeah, that's good.
where you wanted me to go?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I was wondering if you had any practical experience with you mentioned Leeming's study using the lift, lumbar interfascial triangle. I
Hmm.
was curious if do you use that concept in your clients or when you're addressing any imbalances in that area, either with your structural integration style or any other. I mean, do you have any? Did you want to speak on that at all in terms of what you have found in people that there's a dysfunction possibly
Sure.
that you notice as a pattern?
Well, I find that, and honestly, when I'm treating, okay, so you're working on the lateral aspect of the body. You're between the 12th rib and the iliac crest. So we're in that region. Okay, so we have obliques, we have QL, we have the raphe, we have the lumbar interfascial triangle. We've got all that stuff. I find this in many people to be let's call it a neurological dead zone. It's like they don't even know that there's a there because they can't mobilize it, they can't move it.
And is that a
Uh,
space, a potential space that Vleeming was talking about that adds to the core stability?
yes, yes. I believe so, and that's in getting. I mean, everybody knows how to. Everybody kind of knows or should know how to hike their hip up.
Right.
Okay, and the problem is it's usually too hiked up. When you ask somebody hike your hip down, which is the way I used to talk about it, you get everything but the movement that you want.
True.
Sometimes I now ask them to try to approximate doing a hula dance. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. And this is all while I'm doing some kind of stimulation to it, whether it would be an FST-ish kind of stretch with a really, really deep breath to blow it like a balloon from the inside,
Mhm.
or more often just the appropriate amount of manual pressure with my hand. But in people who just cannot find that space,
Mhm.
I'll just kind of say, okay, so your diaphragm comes this way, and it attaches over here to everything, and that's primarily the muscle that you breathe with. So I'm just going to hold my fingers on this spot, and I want you to find it with your breath. Feed that area like the river feeds the sea. I just get very imagery and metaphorical with it, and in my mind, my intention is that I'm trying to access that lift area, that interfascial triangle, to just begin to wake it up on a sensory level. And I would just hold that spot and work with their breathing until I start to feel it move under my fingers and they start to grasp, oh wait, there is a there. And then once we establish that, we can start actually trying to mobilize it a little more.
So I think for listeners who are not familiar with lift or the lumbar interfascial triangle, which Vleeming did a study on extensively and talked about the importance of it, you just related the clinical importance of it, and I guess the functional importance of being able to either stabilize your transversus abdominis, your obliques, that whole core system, versus not, and the impact of lift on it. Folks, if you're listening, I would definitely check out chapter 3. This is where David has a wonderful illustration showing that area, and he goes
Yeah,
into it.
it's
There you
David's 3D House of Lumbar Interfascial Triangles.
Yeah, and there's a little space there, and that's the lift right there, folks.
Yeah,
All that
and when
information.
you know what, and when you have access to it, it really does give you lift. So I don't know. I don't know if Andre did that on purpose or not. He's got a very sly sense of humor. But I have to wonder because it definitely gives you a little bit of lift when you've got access to that point.
So that's just some highlights of chapter 3. Moving on to chapter 4, fascia and the nervous system, and I'll also pull in chapter 5, the brain. I wanted to say in those chapters, and also relating it back to chapter 1, you relate basically mechanotransduction. You relate how
Hmm.
everything from the skin down to the cell is affected with movement, vibration, pressure, all mechanical things. And my understanding is all this occurs outside of the nervous system. It's a separate part of the separate system of the
Right.
fabric of the body,
Hmm.
basically transferring any kind of movement and stimulating DNA synthesis and gene replication and cascade of cellular things. That's amazing that it occurs outside, literally, of the brain and nervous system. Does it work, separately? Of course not. Everything's integrated. We know that. For
Right.
purposes of discussion, we talk about systems and pieces.
Hmm.
But I was curious, how do you talk about this to practitioners out there who say everything's from the brain, everything's from the nervous system? I only do brain-based training. I only do brain-based therapy. When in
Hmm.
fact, this system is enabled with movement outside of the nervous system, just anything imposed on the system. That could be an external force that didn't occur from your active movement,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
You're lying there passively and someone does structural integration, someone stretches you, you're not moving. So I'm not
Mhm.
using my brain to move.
Right.
We take that out. Well, we can start a whole healing process because you quoted the study that they mimicked myofascial release on cells
Yes.
and it reversed cell apoptosis or cell death, which is called
Right.
healing.
Is that what that's called? Wow. Thank you, Chris. I need to put that in the
I will
second
I will
edition.
anthropomorphize it from
Okay,
cells
thank
to an
you. And I
actual
also will want that rat fascia picture for my second edition. And that particular study on apoptosis, I think, is in chapter 8 that he's referring to. Because it's like, where do you put all these, where do you put all the pieces together in the book? So wow, that's a big one. And I want to parse that out a couple of ways because so for those of you who don't know my background, I currently practice at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in their Center for Integrative Medicine. So that's where we have acupuncture, EMDR, yoga. We have a really great MD who's a really good pain doc and a psychiatrist. So he understands the meds of that, kind of riding herd over all of us. A couple of psychotherapists, massage therapists, and such, and I'm in that group. And I, okay, I was bringing that up for a reason, and now I've lost my thread.
No, it's basically
Uh,
talking to those who are brain.
yes, the brain people, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so the big term in the integrative medicine movement, which is starting at hospitals, there's Duke has one, Harvard has one, the Osher Center at Harvard. We're somewhere in the top 10 of there's like almost 80 of them across the country. Is mind body medicine, and in my admittedly stated bias is that again it's mind body, it's this top down thing, and to me the system works both ways. So yes, we can affect the body by affecting the mind, but we can also affect the mind by affecting the body. So the way I like to think about it is mechanotransduction in the nervous system. You're blowing me away on that because I never thought about, these things do seem to be mutually exclusive. And now you're saying, are they mutually exclusive? I hadn't really pondered that.
Well, the thing is,
So,
though, if I may just throw it in there,
yeah, yeah,
these mechanisms work without nervous system input, period. They know
right.
that. So, but of course, everything always
Mhm.
works together. But the fact that they have found that it works really separate from the nervous system, all kinds of ideas come in your head from backup systems to redundant systems that
Sure.
in case one system fails, another system kicks in, or they superimpose on each other, they augment each other, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think the fact is, the thing is, can't we all be friends? Meaning, yeah,
That's what
yes,
I would like, but if you talk to the mindists, and I have to say one of my favorite moments in dissection was actually dissecting out a brain with the spinal cord attached.
yeah,
So I'm very, and as you read in chapter 5, I'm a big student of the brain. Um, that's where I think active involvement makes a difference. So I'm straying away a little bit from the
sure,
mechanotransduction. And you would have to think that mechanotransduction was maybe the primary source. So if we're looking at systems of the brain, body, and translating it to systems of the brain, uh, mechanotransduction could almost be the limbic system. So it's that part of the brain that's so instinctual because it's always been there. The prefrontal cortex is a relatively new phenomenon, which is why we can't stop playing with it and thinking it's the primary driver of everything. But yet we react to the world very instinctively, and that's through the limbic system. What I like to do when I'm working with people, and I think it's essential, is if I get them moving or mobilizing around whatever I'm doing, whether it's a structural integration situation, a fascial release, fascial stretch therapy, but if I'm working on an area and I get them moving around that area, let's just say I'm working on the common extensor tendon down the fingers, and I have them slowly bend their fingers or their wrist, then I am working with the nervous system. I am talking to the brain while I'm working the tissue.
yeah,
And that to me certainly suggests the potential of helping to rewrite the parietal lobe.
Yeah.
so that their atlas, their inner body atlas, begins to have a much more profound change. And we know from Lorimer Moseley that the more attention people pay to their therapy, as opposed to just passively accepting it,
Sure.
generally the better results that they get.
Yeah.
So that's where I see the
Mhm.
mind, the nervous system, and the body all coming together and working as a whole.
Mm.
And then you have the cellular level on top of that. And as you said, it's about healing.
Yeah. So I think it's really, they both work, but it works even better when clients are engaged with what their goals are.
Yeah, it catalyzes it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can take calcium, but if you add magnesium, the calcium is more effective and gets more easily absorbed into the body. It's the same thing here.
Good point. I also liked in that chapter, the two chapters, the brain nervous system, where proprioception was found to be impaired in a study when lumbar fatigue was induced in healthy people as well as with low back pain. It's like, okay, we kind of know, that last ski run, that's when people get hurt. They're tired, but they get a little
Yeah, I know I shouldn't do this, but
they get a little greedy about, the fun kind of aspect of things. I want to just do that run one more time, but their legs are wobbly. It's like, okay, that's an accident waiting to happen. So I love you putting that in there, and it's about proprioception. So we can analyze that, if we can assess that, and you talk about that more later, about assessing and treating proprioception. That's where we're lacking studies. We don't know what works.
correct.
They don't have enough studies, and you mentioned that. Another thing you mentioned, delayed onset muscle soreness, otherwise known as DOMS, as we all know. It comes from fascia. The pain comes from fascia, not from the muscle. So I was thinking, should we call it DOMFAS?
Yes.
Delayed onset myofascial.
Well, I think we need to run that past the Federal Acronym Research Task Force first, or because I think they're in charge of all that sort of thing. Yeah,
I think
it would be more accurate. It would be more accurate.
It would be more accurate, and it's good. It's good for the athletic trainers and people like that in sports really understand, and just personal trainers that work out with people. The DOMS, the soreness, may not be from the muscle that's expanding. They always talk about splitting muscle fibers, and that's what hurts because it's inflammation and it's growing. Hypertrophy phase. Well, maybe not. maybe that does occur with extreme weight training. Maybe both tear the fascia and the muscle. Why? Because they're kind of close to each other. They may even be they're part of the layer system and they're connected. Maybe you're tearing the connections between the fascia and the muscle. A little bit of both are tearing.
That seems very, very likely to me.
Yeah,
that seems very, very likely to me.
I love. Okay, we all talk about five senses, but you talk about proprioception is the sixth sense. And interoception, the seventh. I'm like, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I was going out on a limb there, but it's like, well.
But guess what? They test the five senses in an emergency room. They don't test the sixth and the seventh.
No, they don't. Because it's harder. Language is really good for data and information. It's harder when it comes to experience.
Yeah.
So how do you? I mean. Well, actually, they do test for proprioception. So if you get, maybe this isn't an emergency room, but if you get pulled over because they are suspecting a DUI, they're going to test your proprioception, right? They're going to have you do this. They're going to have you walk a straight line. They're going to, all right. And if it's not within a certain range, they're going to run the breathalyzer, and you're likely going to spend the night in jail. So we do test proprioception in some ways, but how would you even begin to test interoception?
Yeah, I'm going to say to the listeners here, David does talk about that. He talks about testing using the heart rate, what you think it is and what it actually is. We don't have to talk about the details here, but I love the fact that you added that in. You talked about there's few relevant good quality studies on proprioceptive exercise, okay, but a lot of suggestions from Fascial Fitness and other places. Probably no studies on Intero that I know of. That's still even newer in terms of studying it. But I like your recommendation to focus while you work out, while you move, while you're doing what your therapist is asking you to do, as opposed to listening to your iTunes while you're walking on the treadmill or whatever you're doing, to be more engaged in the process. I really like, and that you make a very good argument that most likely does stimulate the interoception system.
Yeah, and that's why I've always been for a long time now, decades, particularly the last decade, a very big proponent and a user of yoga.
Yeah.
Because I think, and again, you have to find the right class, the
Yeah.
right teacher, teachers. But a good yoga class absolutely engenders not just strength and flexibility, but proprioception and interoception. Because it's the quality. It's not just can I turn myself into this crazy pose, or am I strong enough to do a half headstand or something, but what's the quality with which I do that, and how is it different when I twist to the right versus twisting to the left?
Right.
You're constantly getting that kind of feedback. I remember, and this is one of those moments I couldn't fit into the book, but I was in my early 20s. I was living in Florida, and I would go to this yoga class every Monday night. This was like 1986, 87. And that class saved my life. It was taught by a black belt named Kate. She was awesome. And she was one of those teachers who would tell you, if you want to stay in the pose while we're moving on, because there's something more happening there, it's okay. You can do that. I've never met many teachers who, A, allowed that, and it actually felt comfortable to do that. And it doesn't really seem to happen very much anymore. But Kate very much encouraged that. And I can remember one night in some crazy position, and it was just me and my breath and this place. And that place, interestingly enough, probably was the lumbar interfascial triangle. It was definitely the quadratus lumborum, but I didn't know any of that then because I was like 24 and I hadn't studied any of this yet. But it was just every time I would breathe, it would change. I would get a little deeper, things would stretch a little bit more. And I was so fascinated by how single pointed my focus was on my breathing and that place, whatever that place was. And I don't know how long I stayed there while the rest of the class moved out. So that was probably my first experience with proprioception and interoception. So I do think those kinds of mind-body disciplines can engender interoception. And certainly anything you're doing physically, if you're focusing on what you're doing and the quality of it, you should be able to.
Yeah, what just came to light when you talked about that is people who just aren't getting better and they're trying to do something where it's more aggressive. I'm just going to say something like just a more aggressive workout regimen with a group of people where it's more extreme weightlifting, and that's very popular today. If they're still having issues, they may need to do the opposite and go to a more quiet place where they can actually focus like you just did on these areas of the body, because you can't focus like that when you're throwing weights down, you're listening to death rock or something like that. And it's all about just pain is leaving, pain is weakness leaving your body is the philosophy.
Right. Yeah.
So thanks for mentioning that. And also the fact that you mentioned meditation increases the nitric oxide, which relaxes fascia. That's really cool information. I take beetroot powder, organic beetroot powder, because my nitric oxide levels, I'm very flexible, so I don't notice a difference in flexibility. But the nitric oxide levels were on the lower side from a saliva spit test. So I get it up, so to speak.
There's your lift.
Yeah, with the beetroot stuff, and there's other products coming out. One of my students just developed something, but I'm not going to promote or endorse anything on this show. But anyway, I like the fact that you mentioned the NO or nitric oxide and its effect on fascia, and meditation increases NO. So any kind of, I think, focused application of your emptying the mind and just focusing, let's say, on breathing is a type of meditation, and potentially increase the nitric oxide, which relaxes fascia. That may be another mechanism that's working. So that's cool. In chapter 6, University of Pittsburgh regenerated damaged muscle using animal ECM or extracellular matrix graft in 2010. That's already almost 8 years ago. Any progress for humans?
I know, right? Well, yeah, they've been using it to regrow muscle on humans who basically veterans who've been coming back from the Iraq War. Now they're not pretty. They don't look like I've seen photos of regrown quadriceps. They don't look like the quadriceps that you and I would think of as being a quadricep. But functionally, they're restoring function in ways that we couldn't imagine were even possible.
Wow.
And yeah, and I am just, it's the University of Pittsburgh and the hospital system and da 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 da. I am one drop in a 50,000 plus drop bucket. Plus, you've got academia versus medicine and all that stuff. So I'm just actually starting to make some inroads into the regenerative medicine department. The book has been helping a lot for that.
Wow.
So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, if we do this interview by the spring next year, I can get you more information about that
Oh, I
because
love that.
I'm hoping to finally meet with a few of the people who are kind of in charge of regenerative medicine because it's very there's a very high tech aspect to it, but I really think that clinicians like you and me could be accelerating the results that they're getting, and maybe even help shape the results that they're getting with the amazing breakthroughs that they're making.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's that's going to happen sometime in January. I'll have that meeting.
So exciting. We'll stay posted on that. You also mentioned in chapter 6 about the three autonomic nervous systems. We're still, it was first mapped out, you said, in 1907.
Oh yes, yes.
Okay, over 100 years ago, and practitioners still don't think about the gut or the enteric nervous system as part of the autonomic nervous system, the other brain outside of your head, if you will. And I really
So
like,
if
yeah,
I could interrupt you there one
yeah.
second. So, when you talk about the people who say it's all in the brain, it's all in the mind. Well, what about the gut brain? Or are they just not recognizing that as a legitimate brain?
And that goes back to the visceral manipulation, the visceral stretching, the visceral work is working on the gut brain as well. So that, to incorporate that in your therapy seems to be quite important. If we have a gut brain that may be dysfunctional, yeah, you need to do things working from the inside out in terms of flora and fauna and other biochemical adjustments. However, we all know the body works through reflexes. So if you're working through the motility of each organ and you discover that you don't have proper mobility of your organ system, and you can have an effect on it, you can have an outside in effect on the
Oh
health
yeah,
of it. So
absolutely.
I love the way it's so comprehensive, just everything that you've included in this book
Thank you.
makes you
Thank you.
think of it.
Trying to be.
Yeah, it really makes you think of it, the biotensegrity of the inner, the inner part of your body, the organ system, is just as important as the myofascia that we all
Well,
talk.
you look there's that picture on page whatever it is in chapter 6 of the collagen network of the liver. It really isn't that different than the collagen network of the muscles. It really isn't.
Yeah, and you talk about the heart is a fascial is a muscle.
Yeah, right. We forget that.
You start thinking about it in different terms.
It may be the most important muscle.
So listeners, there's just slightly new paradigm, not slightly, but new paradigms about thinking about your body that takes it to the organ system level in David's book as well. And like I can't say enough great things about how it's just so all encompassing. And then in chapter 7, diagnosing fascial conditions, a lot of it seems to be a very reliably based structural integration kind of description and approach. I
Hmm.
was like, oh, I wish these cool pictures that you have in there were, can we see the fascial net distorted the way you show the skeleton distorted with a right thoracic shift?
Oh,
And
that's
I
a
was,
great idea for the
yeah, I
second
want
edition.
for your second edition, please put that in there. I
Well, you
want,
know what? I have to tell you because when I was working with the artist and he sent me the skeletons, to me they didn't look right, and it was his idea to do the body outline around them, which I thought made for a much better
I do like that.
image
Yes,
than
it
just the
is.
skeleton. But I like your idea of showing. I have to think about the best way to depict that, but that's a brilliant idea. Thank you.
Well, you do include it. I forgot where it was, but you do have this beautiful diagram, a traditional muscular diagram of the thigh. ver-
Oh yes, 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 yes. In chapter 3, yeah.
Yeah, versus the body stocking tunic around the thigh. It's like, oh, when is someone going to rewrite or map out, do the whole anatomy atlas that looks
Mhm.
like that, including the distortions that you were trying to show along those lines?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I originally I found a drawing like that in this book.
The color.
It's blue. Yeah, in this Wolf Heidecker.
Oh,
text,
Heidegger.
and it's an old German anatomy book. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the rights to use that particular plate. So is it legal to show this on a video?
Oh, sure.
But what I loved about this book, here I'll show you this one, is so here's the very traditional view of the lower leg
Right.
that we're used to. But
Right.
on the page over here, look at that.
Oh,
Here's the body stocking layer.
yeah.
You know, and and it's hard to tell on this transmission, but it's beautifully rendered in terms of texture and the grain content. You know, if it was wood, the
Sure.
grain would be an issue. Yeah, and what's interesting is I scanned it. I scanned some of these images, and then I reversed the colors and made the grain totally pop even
Mm-hmm.
more.
Mm-hmm.
But I could not get the rights for to use these particular illustrations in the book. They were just astronomical.
Well, I love what
Uh,
you did do in the book in terms of that illustration. It just was a teaser, though, so for the future.
Yeah, it really is a teaser, but I'll keep that in mind. I'm still I'm still looking for some good digital artists to
Yeah.
work on some concepts with.
Tell me about it. And in
So
chapter 7, I just like, you talked about ultrasound and how important that is. It's still probably out of reach to the common clinician practitioner to have an ultrasound unit where you can actually see,
right.
oh, you have thickened fascia in your lumbar area. It's 25% thicker. No
Mhm.
surprise with chronic non-specific low back pain, and so on and so forth. But hopefully someday those units will become miniaturized and smaller and cheaper, less expensive, so people like you and I can maybe afford it and actually, scan it and see what's happening.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think what could be happening from a diagnostic standpoint is, and we have a physical medicine and rehab department at UPMC, PM&R, and those are usually the people that I get along the best with. Is on a diagnostic level, they do have some of them do have access to that equipment, and they can look for
Oh,
those.
that's awesome. So you can,
And then, oh, here, this is what I found, and here's the areas you should be looking to treat, because as cumbersome as it is right now, we'd spend so much time trying to do that, it could actually negatively impact the time we have for therapy unless
of
we're
course.
seeing people for 2 hours. But yeah, a handheld kind of unit, I think we'll see that in our lifetime where it would be a lot easier to just go, oh, there. And then you go, yep, where my finger thought it was. But then you can actually see the layers and that visual representation to the person that you're working on makes a huge difference.
It does.
And I don't want to necessarily get into the whole biology of belief, but there's a big difference to. I think all of us have had this experience, whether it's with a body mechanic or our car mechanic or some other professional that we're dealing with, where it's like, wow, this person really seems to understand what they're doing and what my problem is,
Yeah.
and boy, that immediately has a positive effect as opposed to, I don't know about this. I'm not sure about this person. It has an effect. So the more tools that we can bring to uh, making it real for the person we're treating, I think it changes our outcomes.
Hmm. And
Okay,
finally,
soapbox.
in chapter 8, when you discuss fascia-oriented therapies, I couldn't help but notice every single therapy had an element of stretch in it.
Yes, it did. You're absolutely right about that.
And that,
And
that
you would notice that.
yeah, and of course I'm a little biased. Stretching as a therapy is not the solution for everything. Of course not. However, we live in as you know, an environment where people are in a compressive atmosphere where they're sitting all day, and then with the gravitational field and sitting all day, compressing their bodies all day. It's no wonder that stretching is a very common element in all the therapies that you mentioned, from a lot of localized stretching, whether it's a pressure, shear,
Hmm.
localized stretch. Even the transverse friction massage is a type of teasing apart because
Yeah, it is.
it's transversely across a grain. You're trying to disperse the grain open and increase hyaluronic, effect, hyaluron or whatever it is. So I just thought, with a pretension with a body that is pretense, as we talk about in biotensegrity, where you have too much tension, it
Hmm.
seems like a lot of therapies address that through fascial stretching, what they call it in some therapies, versus the transverse friction massage, and on and on and on. So I thought that was just an interesting observation. What I noticed that there was a lack in every FRC, Fascial Research Congress,
Uh-huh.
really discussing nutrition. You got into nitric oxide, which is an aspect of nutrition too, but I saw a total lack of nutrition science at every
Yes.
Fascial Research Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, there's an exponential increase in certain segments of our population that are obsessed with health on bone broth. And they talk about bone broth.
Can I just say something? Broth has always come from bone.
I know.
Can I just say that? Okay.
It's always been out there.
Cranky old man moment. Cranky old man
No,
moment.
no,
I'm done.
it's always been out there. You're right, but they're talking about the gelatin and collagen aspects of it,
Yeah.
or even buying those products separately. Why? To repair and maintain healthy connective tissue. That's out there now in the popular food-based literature. They're talking about it, and of course, hair, teeth, nails, and actually beauty. It delays
Right.
your aging,
Sure.
skin, joint, bones. Do you have any new insights or feelings about that? I just wish there would be more science, based on that.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, God, there was. I just finished a chapter on fascia for a orthopedic textbook coming out in March. Actually, pretty darn cool. And that was one of the things that the MD who was the editor wanted was a section on nutrition, and I'm like, we don't have a lot, and that's a problem. I mean, or well, put it this way: I don't know that it's a problem. It's certainly an area that nobody's paying attention to. Now, there's something on gelatin, some study on gelatin, but it's not coming to me what that is. I do know, going back to the basics, that vitamin C improves synthesis of collagen.
Right, right.
So, I mean, that's the one thing I can authoritatively say is, yeah, vitamin C. And then there's basic guidelines of the anti-inflammatory diet, but that's just a good general
Right.
guideline for folks who have inflammation issues. So there isn't enough,
Hmm.
and I'm not that is an area that is so complicated
Yeah.
that
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't even begin to wrap my head around how you would go at trying to discover that sort of thing. Is there, if your fascial net was too stiff overall, is there a particular diet that would improve that? Or if you're too flexible, like with an Ehlers-Danlos type thing, is there a particular type of diet that would improve that? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Does it, and how, would you even begin to test for it? So yeah, the answer is no idea. That's why I didn't put much about it in the book.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's just I'm just putting it out there. That would be nice to start seeing. Hopefully, maybe at the next FRC. Who knows? In Berlin next year, maybe someone will present something. But it's kind of a hole that's open that we need to fill with some hopefully some information because it's so important. Obviously, what we eat,
Hmm.
and if there's something
Absolutely.
lacking. Because it's pretty easy to get. They have a lot of products now that make it easy. You don't have to like boil. You don't have to like bake your bones for 24 hours and then cook them for another 48 hours because it's a laborious process to get it from raw bones. You
Oh yeah,
can you
yeah.
can buy actually very good organic type of products, either the actual bone broth itself versus in granular form. And I started taking it myself. It made
So
sense.
what have you noticed? What have you noticed?
I just feel, I think it's subjective. I feel that it helps. I actually mix it with a red spinach product that increases my nitric oxide, and I combine the two, and I kind of like it the way I feel after a vigorous workout. I feel that
Nice.
helps. You know what helps me recover faster. I don't have any soreness or pain. That's just me.
Huh. Wow. Good to know.
That's just me.
Good to know.
So
I'm rehabbing.
last
I'm rehabbing a little Achilles tendonitis.
last but not
So.
least, the
Mhm.
plastination of the Human Fascial Net Project
Oh yeah.
supposedly is coming
Yeah.
up, guys. If you're listening still,
Yeah.
they're attempting to coordinate a project to create a life-size, three-dimensional human fascial net using actual human cadavers in Berlin. They're going to use a plastination that they use at Body Worlds, that technology, probably even more advanced, hopefully. And what do you think? Have you heard anything about it? It's a lot of challenges.
Yeah, it is moving forward, but it has been slowed down. The goal was to actually have these plastinations of the fascial system ready to be unveiled for the 2018 conference in Berlin. It's too tall of an order.
Yeah, I thought so.
Quite simply,
How about an
the
arm? An arm, a leg, of something.
yeah, I don't know. Who knows? They may have. I haven't heard anything about that. But the idea was to do the body stocking, the superficial layer, the body stocking layer, and then an intramuscular layer. The idea was to have like all three layers. Um,
A lot.
and the problem was trying to assemble the right team. And the idea is that you would, I mean, pretty much they needed, what was it, 6, 8, 9 weeks in two chunks, and it was with the timing involved, it was just too tall an order to get enough people to make this a reality.
Yeah.
And then there was the concern that okay, we this is too big to be done hastily.
Right.
Oh, and
Well,
then and then once we make it, oh, what do we do with it? Where do we store it? How do there's a lot of practical considerations, and okay, once we've created this, how do we manage it?
right.
We can't just digitize it and put it in a digital archive somewhere. So
Well,
there were a lot of logistics. So they are moving forward with it.
mhm.
It's just not going to happen this year the way that they were hoping.
Well, I'm going to put this out to you. If you have any interest in this, as you know, we all need accurate or good concepts of images, models, interpretations of the human fascial system somehow, somewhere. The more, the
Hmm.
better. If I don't know if you're still doing your blog or whatever, but it would be great. And I'm just putting out there, no pressure.
Sure.
But if there's any way for you to share, even if you just share it to me, so I can share it with others, our
Uh-huh.
students in the world, about better images about the fascial system. You started some more. You started that in your book,
Yeah.
and if we can continue that, maybe on your second edition, when they say, "Hey, you've sold so many copies, David, we need to do another edition," you can add a more sort of fascial based diagrams. You have it, but it'd be nice to see those distortions, let's say, as a
Mhm.
start.
Yeah.
So we can get those concepts so we can actually see what we're talking about. People need visual, right? So we don't have
Right.
anything out there hardly still on what the fascial distortions actually look like in a global kind of way with the body, functionally, and so on and so forth. It's still muscle, muscle by muscle based.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Um, no, I thank you. Thank you for reinforcing that because that's an area that I keep making inquiries in every time I get an opportunity. If I was at Carnegie Mellon University, man, that would be the best because they're all about their whole digital department is fantastic. So I'm trying to make inroads where I can to create something like that. It's like it's like you remember the old Flying Thigh that Jeff Lynne did all
Yes.
those years ago. Yeah, it's like, well, why did you stop there? There's a whole rest of the body, and um, I've got an application to get the data set for all of that visual information. So if anybody out there listening now has a hotshot digital animator in their family who is looking for a really juicy project, they could do it for reputation and notoriety.
They'll go down in fascial history.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. It's just I was thinking about we don't want to pay you to play this gig, Dave, because don't you just want to do it to get your name out there and for the recognition, And you go, yeah, right, right. But anyway, that's what I'm saying here, guys. So I can get my hands on the data set. I just need to find some hotshot programmer animator who can help me manipulate it the way that it could be manipulated.
Well,
And create that image that as you pointed out, I think when we had this discussion a year ago or so, could be 3D printed.
well, that's awesome. So, in finalizing this wonderful interview, could you just show your book again and tell us where to get it?
Yeah, there you go. Here's the book. By the way, this cover image is not a digital recreation. This is actually a sculpture. And there's an even better, in some ways, but not for the cover, image on the inside. So, anyway, really, really great. You can find Fascia, what it is and why it matters, on Amazon. We had trouble keeping it in stock on Amazon. But that has been corrected. It's already gone into a second printing. Also, you can get it directly from me at fasciastore.com, and I'll be happy to personalize and sign it for you if you get it through Fascia Store. But if you want to get it through Amazon, quick one-click order, easy peasy. You can have it before the holidays
All right. And if they're
or after the holidays.
in Europe, it's
If they're in Europe, go to Handspring, to the publisher,
yeah.
handspringpublishing.com.
There you go. Perfect. Well, listen, David, thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts beyond the book And
Thanks, Chris. No, it was really, really wonderful to have a conversation with you like that.
well, thank you.
Because I'm already thinking about what's beyond the book, and you're helping me to go in that direction more.
Well, on that note, we'll end the interview. So, folks, hope you enjoyed that with David Lasondak, and it's all about his book, Fascia: What It Is and Why It Matters. Highly recommended for, oops, sorry about that, for movement and manual therapists, or if you're just curious about fascia. On that note, TTFN, ta-ta for now, from Chris Frederick, stretchtowin.com. Peace out.
Thanks, Chris.